ClancyPasta presents Aliens Don't Fly Spaceships, They Drive Semi-Trucks. Written by AuthorJoJo. I remember sitting in my car for the longest time, staring at the lights flashing on the dashboard, just hoping they would flicker off. Anything to keep me from having to accept that I was essentially stranded, surrounded by nothing but flat brown land and ever-oppressive darkness. I wish I could have been at least angry at myself. I wish before heading off I had ignored a noise the car made or chose to not care about the way the engine sputtered. That wasn't the case though. When I left for my trip, the car was in tip-top shape and showed no signs of breaking down. Then, all of a sudden, with my headlights painting the dark road before me, the car just died. So I sat with the battery's purpose reduced to keeping me vaguely illuminated, hoping that someone would spot me, but I figured I looked like nothing more than a speck of dust in the distance, similar to the stars hanging above me. My only saving grace was that the heater continued to pump warm air into the car, fending off the cold of the desert around me. Running through my options, I looked in my surroundings once more. No other specks of dust to indicate another living soul could be seen. Do I wait until morning? Do I try to walk? I had been driving for a while, and my destination could be seen on the horizon. Still, it would have been a hell of a walk in the cold. In the morning, though, it would be far too hot, and I didn't have nearly enough water to keep me hydrated. I didn't know if the road was more commonly occupied during the night or the day. It was the kind of drive I would assume people would take at night. It was truly a lovely one. Light pollution hadn't reached the sky, so the stars were as visible as ever. It was almost surreal. What wildlife would I have to look out for? The drive should have been a fairly quick and uneventful one, so I didn't worry about anything like that on departure. It was there, deep diving into my thoughts, that I began to feel my body vibrate. A small shaking that rattled up my spine, jarring me back to the lights on the dashboard. This time, though, the interior of my car was bright, far brighter than my overhead light could accomplish. Turning towards the source of the light, I was immediately blinded by the intense white of two orbs sitting just behind my car, hovering above the ground. For a brief moment, I pictured myself standing far off in the desert and looking towards the sky. I imagined the intense light lifting me off the ground and pulling me into some spacecraft. As my rational brain pulled me away from such fantasy, I came to recognize through the blinding light the rumble was coming from a truck. I dropped the hand shielding my eye in relief and fumbled for the door handle. I don't know how I didn't notice something so large and bright coming up behind me. I figured I was so lost in my thoughts trying to avoid panicking. Pushing open the door, I stepped out into the cold, feeling half of my body still being heated by the front of the truck. I walked around the side of it, remnants of the intense light still blocking bits of my vision, so much so that I was hardly able to make out the face of the man driving the truck, but still, I was happy to see him. I explained to him what happened, how my car decided on its own accord that it wanted to rest by the side of the road for a while, and with a voice that made me feel like a small child asking for something expensive for my birthday, I asked if he could just give me a ride to town as I didn't feel like walking was going to pan out well for me. "Hop in," he replied. His voice sounded like he was shivering as the cold had wrapped around his windpipes. I offered far too many thanks and retrieved my stuff from the car. Shutting it off, the headlights that painted the road vanished. The much more overpowering light of the truck had all but eaten them up. Jogging to the passenger seat, I reached up and pulled the large door open. It swung with a heft I wasn't expecting and nearly threw me back. Using the metal steps, I climbed up into the cabin and rested back on the seat. I said thank you again and offered my name up. Waiting a moment in silence, he turned to me, features still hidden in the dark, though, thinking back, with the headlights, I should have been able to make something out. I noticed he wasn't looking at me, but the door that I hadn't yet closed. Sheepishly, I apologized and swung the door shut. It slammed, wafting the bang through the cabin, and after shutting, offered a bizarre click, like the winding of gears. It was odd, but I figured truck doors need to have sturdier mechanisms to keep them closed. I heard the driver shift, and the vibration of the truck intensified. It lurched forward. Soon we left my car behind. I was so happy to be moving again, I almost didn't realize how cold it was in the cabin. The rattling from the vibrations seemed to echo the chill running across my bare skin. I didn't want to be rude and ask for the driver to turn the heat on. I didn't understand how he wasn't cold though. He was just wearing a long-sleeved shirt and jeans. Nothing special. Looking over at him, trying to get a read on his face, I noticed just how clean the cabin was. Looked like it had been just bought. Nothing like what you see in shows where wrappers are littered everywhere and clothing draped over the seats. Swallowing my pride, I began to speak again. Lips quivering, I started to ask if he could turn the heat on, but my words came out soft. It was hard to get the air out to form the words pressing out of my head. The smell, the heat wasn't on, but the air was still coming from the vents. I'm not sure if it was like that from when I first got in or if it started when we started moving, but the smell was different. I was trying to put my finger on what it smelled like when my vision started to go hazy. When had we stopped moving? How long were we moving for? Who was I sitting next to? I turned my head to get a look at him while I felt my body going limp. His face was illuminated now, but my vision was clouded. His features seemed to stretch and pull away under my impaired gaze, and then I blacked out. I came to slowly, my senses returning to me one after the other. The first was smell. Taking in a gasping plume of air, I noticed the strange smell from before was gone. It was replaced by the smell of rusting iron and batteries. Then I could hear a small clattering of objects around me, like thin metal tubes falling over each other. It wasn't long before I could feel again. Thick restraints around my wrist and ankles became apparent to me first, though I wasn't immediately aware of their purpose as I wasn't able to move my body anyways. Soon after, I could feel similar restraints on my forehead and chest. My eyes were struggling to open. I couldn't move my body and had to fight to try and flutter my eyelids, small slivers of the scene around me. While noises continued, I fought and fought to open my eyes. When I finally managed to open them wide enough to see what kind of situation I was in, I discovered the reason for my restraints. The grogginess of me waking up must have hidden the feeling at first, but as I looked around as much as a motionless neck would allow, I understood underlying vertigo. I thought I'd find myself laying on a table, but instead, I was constrained to the ceiling. Looking down, I saw a table filled with various instruments. It didn't take much deductive reasoning to put together that I was in the back of that truck, the large metal container hauled by the same man who had picked me up. Then the door opened. Another light flooded into the container as two figures stepped up into it. The driver I instantly recognized, but now there were two of them. The same shirt, pants, and body build. They spoke to each other. It sounded like a whisper, but as I listened carefully, it was more like an expulsion of air. Within the soft rushing of breath were faint clicks, the innocuous cling that a safe cracker would listen for. One of them looked up at me, recognizing that my eyes were open. It expelled more air, alerting the other who almost looked up at me. Their eyes were devoid of pupils or sclera. Instead, their eyes consisted entirely of a faded violet. The color became more vibrant as it reached the center of the eye and duller near the edges. One of them made a motion to the light that was being cast into the truck. The light then shifted to a color similar to their eyes, making the interior of the truck saturated with the muddy purple. The color felt oppressive. It weighed heavy on my chest and was accompanied by a low mechanical hum that shook against my back. I didn't feel it at first, the instrument that had invaded my stomach. It was a pinprick of pain that grew into a gnawing heat as the instrument, guided by one of the men, dragged from my stomach up the restraints on my chest. Despite the pain, I wasn't able to scream or shake, fight the sensation in any way. I just had to suffer it, which I think made it worse. I had no outlet but the pain. Looking over, I could see that the light had caused the rusted sides of the truck to shift into something with reflective properties. It was a warped image, but I could see myself hanging on the ceiling as the driver sliced me open. It was more like an out-of-body experience, though, like my mind was trying everything it could to separate me from the pain. I'm not sure how much the efforts worked though. I could feel every aching inch of my skin being divided. Then I felt it, something like experiencing 0G on a roller coaster. When the knife reached the restraint, the driver parted my skin with another tool and my stomach dropped. My inside fell away from me. I watched in exhaustive horror as the parts of me I've only ever seen in movies or medical textbooks rushed out like water. Shutting my eyes, I waited for the sound of my wet organs slapping the bottom of the metal box I was in and was surprised when I heard nothing. Opening my eyes again slowly, I could see in the reflection that my organs were suspended. It was as if the light was acting as a 0G generator. Even my globs of blood would drip down and hang in the air. There was a video of some astronaut showing how water acted outside of Earth's gravity. It looked similar to how my blood was acting, though my blood was more viscous and held together better in the environment. At some point, the pain just became part of me. The fear that was clawing in my inside was soothed somehow, like something was telling me I wasn't going to die, that the pain is temporary. Fascination took over as I watched my insides shift and undulate, still performing their necessary task like nothing abstract was happening. Everything except my stomach. Almost as if reacting to the light, I watched a small yellow flash emit from my stomach. I could feel the heat of it every time it flashed. The two things walked over to it, the yellow light rhythmically casting over their skin. It looked like human skin, but was a light shade of gray and seemed to wrap around them tightly. One held my stomach, and the other used something to cut into it. My fascination flushed away, and in its place, a much more intense agony radiated throughout me. I got nauseous as I felt the pain in my stomach so distant from my body. It was like a snake devouring its food, and how the pain would run through my body one bit at a time. My lungs, stomach, intestines, all separate sections of myself experiencing pain on their own. The driver reached into the opening he had created and retrieved the flashing light. Holding it in his hand, I couldn't see the metal device flashing against its gray, cracked skin. The other driver placed his hands over the device, and I watched as a faint light emitted between the two. Once it was gone, the device was now flashing a bright blue and was returned to my stomach. When this light was returned, however, I didn't feel any heat or pain. The driver placed his hand over the opening in my stomach and emitted the light once more. Then both of them returned their gaze to me, their eyes closed, making their faces almost featureless, just walls of gray flesh. Then I could feel the restraints beginning to loosen, and as the purple light returned to white, the restraints were completely released, and I fell. I braced for impact, but found that I fell slowly. I watched as I was engulfed by the white light. Able to turn my head, I looked towards the source of it. While it was blinding, I was able to see out of the truck into space beyond. The light shining into my box from another truck's headlights was not the only one. Next to and behind that truck was another truck. Next to those trucks, another truck, and so on and so on. I couldn't see past the first few, but I could feel it. An ocean of similar trucks driven by similar men masked by the twilight, all humming the same tune, releasing the same light. I didn't know if any of those trucks had someone in them or if they were all empty, but I could feel they all served the same purpose. As that ocean revealed itself to me, and I was able to see into the infinity, my face crashed into the ground. I let out a gasp of air that kicked up the dirt in front of me. My chest and arms ached from the sudden impact. Finally in control of my body once more, I scrambled around to try and get on my feet. It felt like I was taking my first steps. Unfamiliar with how to operate my body, I flailed around on the road for several minutes before I began getting the hang of it. It was like the neural pathways that had formed over my years of life were locked off to stop me from moving. Realizing I was still bathed in a light, I panicked, looking towards the source to find the headlights of my car sitting lonely in the road. Confused, I lifted my shirt to look over my skin. Running my hand over the flesh, I couldn't find any imperfections that weren't already there, but when I ran my fingers over where I knew the skin was split, The memory of fire-like pain crept into my mind. Removing my hand halted the memory. Not sure of what else I should do, I shuffled over to my car and sat myself down in the driver's seat. I once again pictured the light of my car against the dark expanse, nothing but a dot in the sky. With the turn of the key, the car sprang to life, and with the press of the gas, it began to roll forward, completely vacant of the dashboard warnings that previously plagued it. I drove all through the night until reaching my destination. Nothing stood out on my drive except for when I drove by a trucker's stop. A completely unremarkable truck sat among the branded ones. I knew in my head that it couldn't have been the driver who had picked me up, but I couldn't stop my hair from standing on edge. Because I know now that aliens don't fly spaceships, they drive semi-trucks. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. I want to give a huge thanks to all of my supporters over at Patreon and YouTube memberships. Your support makes these narrations possible, and I appreciate it a ton. If you'd like to join these lovely ghouls, you can head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/clancypasta, or click the join button below to become a member. And if you'd like creepy cool shirts, make sure to head on over and check out my official merch store for some awesome tees, hoodies, stickers, and more. Alright. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great night. Cheers.